It was 1:43 a.m. when the voice on the radio described my truck. Not vaguely, not by type of vehicle or general color. It described the license plate number, and said I was transporting agricultural equipment packed on blue pallets. I stared at the radio for about 3 seconds, unable to process it, because only I knew what was inside that truck bed, and the manifest had been in the glove compartment since I left Abilene. The voice then said there were about 22 minutes left to the turn. I had left Abilene around 10:30 p.m. carrying agricultural equipment, blue pallets tied to the bottom of the truck bed, a scheduled delivery to a farm outside Salina by mid-morning the following day. Simple route, a road I knew reasonably well, no tolls, no mandatory stops. The dispatch had given me the normal route and I had no reason to deviate. But the road was different that night. I can't explain it properly. Maybe it was the time, but not a single vehicle appeared in the opposite direction in the first 2 hours. I think it was around 12:20 a.m. that I saw the pickup truck. It was stopped on the shoulder with its lights completely off, neither the emergency lights nor the position lights, nothing. I slowed down a little reflexively, looked in the mirror, and saw no movement at all. I thought it was someone who had stopped to sleep, maybe tired, maybe a mechanical problem solved. I continued. By then, the cell phone signal had disappeared about 40 minutes ago, and the only contact with the outside world was the cable car, which I left on the default channel without paying much attention. The radio was almost silent for hours, just light static and some distant driver I couldn't quite understand. I changed channels a few times for no specific reason, just out of habit, and stopped on a channel I don't normally use because it picked up less interference in that area. That's when the voice appeared. Calm, unhurried, as if it were in the middle of a conversation I simply hadn't heard the beginning of. It described my license plate, the color of my truck, the contents of the cargo area. And then it said there were 22 minutes left until the curve. I stood there for about 30 seconds doing nothing, just staring at the radio as if it were going to give me some explanation on its own. I thought maybe it was another driver who had seen me leaving Abilene, someone who knew the cargo for some professional reason, a dispatcher, a yard supervisor, anything. I convinced myself that there was a simple explanation that I wasn't seeing because of tiredness and the time. So I picked up the microphone and asked who was on the line. The voice answered immediately, without delay, without hesitation. He said the name of a company I didn't recognize and asked if I had left on time. I said yes, that I had left Abilene at 10:22. Silence for about 4 seconds. Then the voice came back and said exactly 10:22, confirming the number as if he were writing it down. I turned off the microphone and felt something churn in my stomach because I hadn't said 10:22 to anyone, not even to the dispatcher. He had left early and hadn't reported his departure yet. I wondered if I should stop, if I should turn on my hazard lights and wait on the shoulder, but my cell phone still had no signal, and I didn't know exactly where I was in relation to the last town. The exits I remembered were long gone, and the road ahead was straight and dark with no indication of an upcoming intersection. The CB radio was quiet for about 2 minutes, and then the voice returned, lower this time, saying that there were 18 minutes left until the curve. The voice returned exactly 4 minutes later and said there were 14 minutes left. I glanced at the speedometer. I was doing 62 miles per hour, and I did the calculation in my head. 14 minutes at 62 miles per hour was approximately 14.5 miles. I accelerated to 78 without thinking much, just by instinct, and waited. 3 minutes later, the voice said there were 11 minutes left. I did the calculation again. 11 minutes at 78 miles per hour. It matched. It matched exactly. That left me with my hands glued to the steering wheel, because it's not the kind of thing that happens by accident. It's not someone guessing. To get 2 consecutive counts right at different speeds, someone needed to be looking at a number in real time. Speed, position, distance to the curve, all together. I thought about the pickup truck stopped on the shoulder with its lights off, and something connected in a way I wish it hadn't. I tried to accelerate more. I went to 85, 88, but the road was dark and narrow, and I felt I was losing control of the situation much more than of the steering wheel. The onboard computer was silent for almost 5 minutes, and I almost convinced myself that it was over, that it was some kind of joke, that I had misinterpreted the numbers. Then the voice returned, and this time there was no countdown. It just said that I could slow down because the curve was going to appear the way it was going to appear. The phrase didn't sound like a direct threat. It sounded worse than that. It sounded like an instruction, as if the decision to stop or continue was no longer mine. I entered the curve at about 40 miles per hour, and the headlights appeared in front of me without warning, high, right in my eyes. And it took me a second to understand that it wasn't a car coming from the opposite direction. It was a truck across the lane, its cargo box perpendicular, completely occupying both lanes. I slammed on the brakes and stopped less than 20 feet from the side of its cargo box, my truck's engine still roaring, my hands still gripping the steering wheel. The onboard computer went silent. No static, no interference, complete silence, as if someone had flipped a switch. I stood there for about 3 seconds, unable to move, and that's when I saw the movement on the shoulder. 2 vehicles I hadn't noticed because their lights were off, a pickup truck and a dark SUV, and their doors opened almost simultaneously. 3 figures got out slowly, without haste, without running, and that's what stopped me more than anything else, the calmness. There was no urgency in their movement because they knew I had nowhere to go. The roadblock truck in front, the narrow road with ditches on both sides, and the sharp curve behind me. I instinctively grabbed the CB radio microphone and pressed the button. I don't even know what I was going to say, but nothing came out of the radio. It was a dead channel. One of the figures was about 15 feet from my truck when I instinctively turned on my high beams, and she stopped for a second, raised her arm to cover her face, and I saw that there was another vehicle behind us, which had arrived without me noticing while I was looking ahead. 4 vehicles. 4 vehicles and at least 5 people, and me in the middle, stopped, with a load that someone knew exactly what it was since Abilene. I remembered the tracker by accident. My hand reflexively went to the dashboard, searching for something, anything, and touched the button the company had installed 3 months earlier without making much of a fuss about it. I pressed it without really knowing if it would work. The device had its own signal separate from the cell phone, and a red light flashed twice, confirming the transmission. After that, I only did one thing. I locked the doors, turned off the headlights, and stood still in the dark. The figures outside continued moving for a while. I heard footsteps on the gravel of the shoulder. Someone tried the passenger side door handle once, and then stopped. I stayed inside the cabin for 19 minutes. I know because I kept looking at the clock on the dashboard. I needed something concrete to focus on while I waited. The lights of their vehicles gradually disappeared, not all at once. First the pickup, then the SUV, and the roadblock truck slowly pulled around the curve without turning on its headlights until it disappeared down the road. When the state police car appeared, I still had my hands on the steering wheel. The officer knocked on the window, and it took me a second to unlock it. The police stayed at the scene for almost 2 hours but found nothing but tire tracks on the shoulder of the road. When they inspected the truck bed, the seal was broken and 4 pallets had been removed. I don't know exactly when this happened, maybe during those 19 minutes, maybe before. Maybe someone had access to the truck bed before I left Abilene and I never knew. The company filed a claim, the insurance company paid partially, and the police report remained open without charges. No one was identified. I requested to be removed from the route 2 months later, without giving a detailed explanation to anyone, just saying I wanted to change regions and that it was time for a change. The company didn't question it much. They made the transfer in less than a week, and I ended up with a smaller operator in the Northwest. Completely different routes, no rural roads at dawn, no long stretches without signal. I deactivated the CB radio in the new truck in the first week of operation. It wasn't a dramatic decision. I just left the device disconnected and never felt the urge to reconnect. Some colleagues asked about the CB, police report, and I said I preferred to work in silence, that it was more productive, that it was a new habit. Nobody insisted. The police report remained open for months, and the insurance company closed the claim with a partial payment without identifying anyone. The company changed some dispatch protocols after the incident, nothing dramatic, just routine adjustments, and I signed the new forms without mentioning the real reason, because the real reason wasn't going to change anything on paper. What I still can't figure out, and I stopped trying a long time ago, is the time. I left Abilene at 10:22 that night without reporting to the dispatcher because I was going to get ahead and sort things out at the first stop. There was nobody in the yard when I closed the truck. I didn't speak to anyone between leaving and getting on the road, and I hadn't texted anyone. The voice on the radio knew the exact time. My name is Harlan Dukes, and this specific detail still has no answer. If that first story left you looking over your shoulder, hit the like button. It helps the channel keep moving through the dark. And for those of you watching from a cab or a quiet room, have you ever seen something out there that you couldn't explain? Share your story in the comments. I signed the manifest without reading it because the guy offered me the pen before I finished getting out of the booth. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't a threat. It was just the timing. He already had the paper in his hand and the pen extended when my feet touched the ground, and I signed it reflexively as I always do. 20 minutes later, there were 3 federal revenue agents inside the dock with vests and clipboards, and the supervisor called me by name before I understood what was happening. The manifest I had signed listed 48 boxes. I had delivered 31. That had been my second route that day. I left early in the morning, made a delivery in Columbia, returned to the yard, picked up the second load, and went straight to Charleston without stopping to sleep because the deadline was tight, and I needed the punctuality bonus that month. When I arrived at the dock, it was 11:40 p.m., and I had been operating on autopilot for hours, that state where you do everything right mechanically but aren't really paying attention to anything. I parked, checked the mirror, turned off the engine. The dock felt strange right away, not in an obvious way, but strange. For that time of day, I expected at least 2 or 3 employees, maybe a shift supervisor, maybe a forklift moving somewhere. It was silent. The warehouse lights were on, but there was no visible movement inside, and the only sign of life was that worker who appeared from the side of the warehouse while I was still getting out of the cab, walking in the right direction, at the right pace, as if he knew exactly when I was going to arrive. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask for the manifest number, didn't request any documents before starting. He just said I could open the trunk and he'd call the team. I waited for the team for about 2 minutes while he stood near the back of the truck looking at his cell phone, and when I looked at the warehouse, no one else had shown up. I asked where the rest of the group was, and he said they were on break, that they'd be there soon, and turned his cell phone face down before I could see the screen. The team showed up about 3 minutes later, 2 guys who emerged from the back of the warehouse without any hurry, and the unloading began unceremoniously. I stayed outside watching out of the corner of my eye while trying to stay awake, leaning against the side of the truck. That's when the worker returned with the manifest in his hand, already open to the signature field, the pen extended in the right direction, and I grabbed both without thinking because it was the final part of the delivery, and my brain had already decided that the night was over. I signed where he was pointing and handed back the pen. He took the paper, folded it in half, and was putting it away on his clipboard when I saw, for less than 2 seconds, that there was more text below the fold. I didn't read it. I couldn't read it at that time, but I saw that there was something else down there, another block of text, another field perhaps, another. I asked what the bottom part of the manifest was, and he said it was just the client's internal protocol, that it didn't need a signature, and he put the clipboard under his arm before I could finish formulating my next question. I should have insisted. I didn't insist. I grabbed my folded copy, put it in the glove compartment without opening it, and went to the warehouse bathroom because I needed to wash my face before getting back on the road. When I returned to the truck, the worker was no longer visible, and the lights on the rear dock had been turned off. Only the main lights in the warehouse were still on. I got into the cab, reclined the seat for about 20 minutes thinking about resting before leaving, and that's when the headlights of 3 vehicles illuminated the dock entrance at the same time. The 3 vehicles stopped at the dock entrance, and the agents got out wearing vests and holding clipboards, without running or shouting, with that bureaucratic movement that's more frightening than any real urgency. One of them came straight towards me while the other 2 went into the warehouse and asked for my ID and the delivery manifest. I grabbed the ID from the glove compartment, and when I picked up the folded manifest next to it, I felt something tighten in my chest, without yet knowing exactly why. I opened the paper right there in front of the agent and saw the number, 48 boxes. I had left the yard with 31. I knew that. I had checked before closing the truck in Columbia because it was my protocol. It always has been. I looked at the signature field at the top where I had signed, and it was correct, my handwriting, my name. Then I looked under the fold that I hadn't opened before, and there was a second field, filled with 48 boxes delivered and checked by the driver. And below that field was my signature again. The same handwriting, the same name. I didn't remember signing there. The agent carefully took the manifest from my hand and called his colleague on the radio without taking his eyes off me. I tried to explain that I had only signed in the top field, that I hadn't seen the second field, that the paper was folded, but as I spoke I knew how it sounded, and I knew the agent knew too. The dock supervisor appeared from the side of the warehouse at that moment in full uniform, clipboard in hand as if he had been waiting for the cue, and told the agents that the driver had personally checked the cargo before signing. Pete Gallagher. He used my full name. One of the agents came towards me while the other two were already inside the warehouse with flashlights, and he asked me to describe the delivery process from arrival. I recounted everything in order: the empty dock, the worker who appeared alone, the unloading, the signature. The agent listened without interrupting, noting something on his tablet, and when I finished he turned the screen towards me and showed me the photographed manifest. 48 boxes. My signature below, clear in the main field, and a second signature in the folded field that I hadn't seen, different from mine, which I had never seen before in my life. The agent asked if I had checked the cargo before signing, and I said no, that I was tired, that the process had seemed normal. He noted that too. Then he asked if I knew where the worker who had received the delivery was, and I looked at the warehouse reflexively, but I didn't see anyone besides the other two agents and the two guys from the unloading team leaning against a back wall. The worker who had given me the pen was nowhere to be seen. I asked the agent when they had arrived at the dock, and he said they had received an anonymous tip 40 minutes before my arrival. That blew my mind for a second, because 40 minutes before my arrival, I was still on the road, without contact with anyone at the dock, without having confirmed my arrival time to anyone other than the customs broker. Someone knew I was going to arrive at that specific time and alerted customs before I even parked. I tried to explain this to the agent, but he had already turned the tablet back around and was typing something, and I realized that from their point of view, the simplest story was the one with my signature on the wrong manifest. The supervisor showed up around midnight, coming from the office at the back of the warehouse looking like he'd just been woken up, his tie crooked, his badge turned around, and went straight to one of the agents, saying the company had nothing to do with it and that he wanted to see the warrant. The two argued for about 5 minutes while I stood outside, unsure if I could move. Then the supervisor went back to the office and returned with a tablet showing the internal camera system, clearly trying to prove that the dock operation had been normal that night. The agent stared at the screen for about 15 seconds without saying anything, then called his colleague. They both looked at it together, and one of them asked the supervisor to rewind the recording for another hour. The image showed the empty dock, the lights on, and the worker entering alone through the side entrance carrying a clipboard, an hour and 20 minutes before I parked. He went straight to the boxes, rearranged the stack, separated 17 units, and moved them to a side corridor outside the main camera angle. Then he came back, looked at his cell phone for a while, and then left through the same side entrance. The manifest with the wrong numbers was already on the clipboard when he entered. The supervisor stared at his own screen, unable to say anything for a moment, and then began to say that he didn't know that employee, that he hadn't authorized that access, and that he would need to check the entry records. One of the agents was already photographing the tablet screen when the other went towards the side corridor where the boxes had been moved. I remained standing in the same place outside, with my copy of the incorrect manifest still folded in the truck's glove compartment and my signature on the field that I hadn't read. They released me around 2 a.m. after I signed a witness statement and answered the same questions about 4 times to different agents. I left the dock with an empty truck, no return load, no punctuality bonus, and drove the first 20 minutes on full autopilot before stopping at a gas station and sitting in the parking lot for almost half an hour, unable to get out of the truck. It wasn't exactly fear, it was more that feeling when you understand you did everything right, and yet you're in the middle of something that could end badly. The company sent an email the next morning asking me to go to HR before taking any new routes. The meeting lasted 40 minutes, and the manager read excerpts from my contract aloud, specifically the clause that placed responsibility on the driver for signed documentation upon delivery. I had signed it. It was on paper. The fact that the camera showed the scheme working before I arrived didn't eliminate the signature. It only complicated the narrative, and the company needed a clean narrative for the lawsuit the client was going to file. I left there with a 15-day preventive suspension without pay, while the case was handled internally. The worker was never identified by his real name. The badge he was wearing belonged to an employee who was on medical leave that week and didn't even know the badge was missing. The 17 diverted boxes were found partially in a warehouse 11 miles from the dock, with no one at the location when the police arrived. Pete Gallagher left that HR meeting with a suspension on his record, an open administrative process, and a new rule that didn't exist before: photograph the entire manifest, front and back, before signing any field, at any dock, at any time. I was released by the federal agents around 2 in the morning after signing the witness statement and handing over my copy of the manifest. One of them told me that I wasn't a target of the investigation, that the images had made the situation clear, and that I would be contacted if they needed anything else. I drove back to the yard on autopilot, parked the truck, went home, and slept for 4 hours. The next morning, the client's lawyer had already sent a notification to the transport company using the signed manifest as the central document, my signature, wrong number of boxes without any reservations. The civil case took almost 5 months to be closed after the federal investigation identified the worker and confirmed the embezzlement scheme. During that time, I worked with an open civil notification in my name, which blocked a route promotion I had been hoping for a long time, and which was given to another driver while my situation was unresolved. I was called to testify twice, each session lasting between 2 and 3 hours, and on the days of the depositions, I had no routes, no pay. In the end, I wasn't convicted of anything. I didn't lose my license, and I didn't pay a fine. I only lost 5 months of my license and the promotion. After the case was closed, I sat down and wrote a protocol for myself, 3 items, on a sheet of paper that stayed stuck to the glove compartment for months. Photograph the sealed trunk before opening it. Photograph the complete manifest before signing it, front and back, with the date and time visible in the image. Never use a dock worker's pen. These are simple things that anyone would say are obvious, and probably are, but nobody told me this before that night in Charleston, and I learned it the hard way. My name is Pete Gallagher, and nowadays every time someone comes towards me with a paper already open to the signature section and a pen outstretched, I stop, ask for the document, read it from beginning to end, and only then ask if they have a pen to lend me. It takes about 2 extra minutes. I've never had a problem since then. But every time I do this, I think about that worker leaving through the side entrance an hour before I arrive, with the wrong manifesto already on his clipboard, waiting for me to be tired enough not to read anything. The badge was turned around. Not crooked, not poorly attached, but completely turned inwards with the smooth back showing where the license plate number should be. I noticed this when he was already by my window asking me to get out, and I stared for a second trying to decide if it was carelessness or if I had misinterpreted the angle. I got out. He asked me to open the trunk without giving any legal justification, just saying it was a routine inspection, and waited as if the answer was obvious. I went to the back, unlocked the seal, and lifted the door. That's when the real police car entered the yard with its lights flashing. I was driving a long route from northeastern Kansas southward, carrying industrial equipment, scheduled for delivery the following morning in Oklahoma City. The way station I entered is on an exit I'd used 4 or 5 times before. I know the stretch well, and usually stop there to check my tires before continuing. When I slowed down to enter, the external signage was normal, nothing indicating closure, no cones blocking the entrance, no lights out. I only found out the way station was marked as closed in the state's internal system when the police showed me the record later, and by then it was too late. The yard was empty when I parked, no other trucks, no visible official vehicle, no movement in the inspection shed. For that time of day it was strange but not impossible. Sometimes you catch a gap between trucks without realizing it. I waited for someone to leave according to normal procedure, but no one did, and about 2 minutes later, the agent appeared from the side of the shed, not through the main entrance, from the side. walking towards my truck with a firm stride as if he knew exactly where I had parked. He was wearing a uniform that looked correct from a distance, the right color, the right vest, but when he got closer, there was something about the outfit that didn't fit, and I couldn't identify what it was at that moment. Only later did I understand that it was the absence of a radio on his belt. Every weighbridge agent who had ever stopped me had a radio on their belt or shoulder. This one had nothing. He came to the window, knocked twice, and I rolled down the window without questioning because that's what I always do when someone in uniform shows up. I asked about the badge when he asked me to get off the truck. Not aggressively, I just mentioned it was upside down. He looked at his chest with an expression like he'd just remembered something unimportant, turned the badge over with 2 fingers, and held it for about 3 seconds before repositioning it on his vest. I saw the name. I could read the name. But the registration number was covered by his index finger for the entire 3 seconds. And when he let go, the badge was slightly crooked again. Not completely turned, but crooked enough that the number remained illegible. I got off the truck. He walked beside me to the back without saying anything else, without asking for documents, without a tablet in his hand. I asked what he wanted to inspect, and he said it was a weight and cargo securing check, standard procedure. The explanation sounded right because it's the kind of thing they check, but the normal procedure involves checking documentation before opening the cargo compartment, and he hadn't asked for any of that. I unlocked the seal and lifted the door because that was the logic of the moment. Uniform, scale, inspection order, and my brain went on autopilot before I finished processing what was wrong. The trunk opened and he climbed into the back without waiting for my instruction, which is also not normal procedure. Normally the driver gets in first. I stood on the ground looking inside while he went towards the tie-downs in the back, and it was at that moment that I saw out of the corner of my eye the headlights at the entrance to the yard. A police car, lights flashing, 2-tone lights, entering slowly as if checking the area before accelerating. The officer inside my trunk hadn't seen it yet. The fake agent saw the lights before I did, I'm sure of it now, because he stopped moving inside the trunk for about 2 seconds before I finished processing what was entering the yard. When I turned my head to confirm it was a police car, he was already getting out of the back, not running but too fast to be natural, and passed by me with his shoulder almost touching my arm without saying anything. I stood there for a moment not knowing what to do, because the situation was unpredictable. There was a uniformed guy getting out of my trunk towards the side of the warehouse, and a police car with flashing lights entering through the main entrance at the same time. I instinctively moved out of the way and he passed. I didn't yell, I didn't block, I didn't do anything useful in that second. I just watched him turn to the side of the warehouse while the police car stopped about 30 feet from me, and the real agent got out with his hand on his belt. He looked at me, looked in the direction I was looking, and asked what had gone that way. I said it was someone in uniform who had gotten out of my trunk. The agent spoke on the radio and headed towards the side of the warehouse without wasting any time, and I stood there with the open cargo compartment and the cargo straps disturbed inside. A second agent stayed with me while the first went behind, and that's when the situation started to make sense in a way I wish it hadn't. Scale locked in the system, empty yard, agent without radio, without tablet, without request for documentation, badge that never showed a registration number. Everything I had noticed and dismissed started falling back into place while I stood there staring at the inside of the cargo compartment with my hands in my pockets, not knowing what he had done in there during the 3 minutes he was alone with my cargo. The real agent returned around the side of the warehouse about 4 minutes later with the fake agent in front, hands behind his back, uniform still in place but the badge completely bent now, and I stared at his face trying to find something that would explain how I hadn't seen it before. It was an ordinary face, ordinary height, a uniform that could easily pass for a distance, and that was probably the whole point. The real agent told me not to touch anything and climbed onto the chest alone, while the second agent stayed with the detainee outside. It took about 6 minutes for him to call his colleague and show him what he had found attached to the front beam of the truck bed, in a spot you can't see from the outside and only find by running your hand along the structure. It was a small tracker, a steel clamp, with its own signal independent of the truck. The officer explained that the objective was never to steal there at the weigh station, but to mark the truck for a later stop on the road, in a stretch without cameras or patrol cars nearby, with enough time to transfer the cargo calmly. If the patrol car hadn't entered that yard at that moment, I would have left thinking I had passed a normal inspection. I was released that night after almost 2 hours of giving testimony and signing the witness statement. The cargo arrived late at its destination, and the carrier absorbed the fine without much comment. But 3 weeks later, I received formal notification of being summoned as a witness in the lawsuit against the fake agent. I couldn't refuse. It was a legal obligation, so I signed the receipt and kept the paper. The first hearing was a month and a half later, the second came 40 days later, and on both days I didn't get a route, which meant a day without pay and no compensation from the company. The account I gave in the testimonies ended up generating something I didn't expect. The carrier used the case to create an internal manual for verifying authority at weighbridges, mandatory legible license plate number before getting out of the cab, radio confirmation on the seatbelt, and request for documentation before opening the cargo hold. They called me in to review the draft, which took another half day without a route. My name became informally linked to the protocol. My colleagues knew it came from my case, and I never really knew if that was good or bad within the company. Nobody said anything directly, but there's a difference between being the driver who cooperated with the investigation and being the driver who let a stranger into his own cargo hold without questioning. Both things were true at the same time, and I could feel it in the conversations that stopped when I got close. I still take that route sometimes, not every week, but often enough to pass the same exit where it happened. Every time I get to that section, I slow down a little more than I need to. It's not a conscious decision. It happens before I even finish thinking about it. And I only realize it when I'm already entering the access road slower than usual, without having chosen to do so. I've tried not to do it a few times, telling myself it was silly, that the place was just a way station like any other. It didn't help. I developed new habits that became routine without ceremony and without me planning any of them. Before getting out of the truck at any way station, I photographed the agent's badge through the window, making sure the license plate number is legible and visible in the image, or I simply don't open the door. I check the radio on my belt before anything else, before the uniform, before the vehicle, before asking for any documents. If there's no visible radio on the belt or shoulder, I don't get out, no matter the tone of voice, no matter what they say. What I still can't get out of my head isn't the moment he passed me with his shoulder almost touching my arm, nor the tracker the agent found on the trunk's beam. It's the 3 seconds I spent staring at the badge turned out the window before getting out, calculating whether it was worth questioning, deciding it wasn't, opening the door. 3 seconds where I saw something wrong, recognized it was wrong, and ignored it anyway. That specific interval is what I've carried with me ever since, every time a way station appears on the road. The road never truly ends, and neither do the things that hide just out of sight. To make sure you never miss another trip into the shadows, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks for stopping by Beyond the Quiet. Keep your eyes on the road and stay safe out there. I'll see you in the next one.